Good evening and hello. Welcome everyone to Iowa EdChat Live. We are so glad that you're here with us today on this Mother's Day, and happy Mother's Day to all of our mothers out there. We hope that you've had a fantastic day with your families, and we are coming at you tonight with Iowa EdChat Live, continuing to bring you the latest news from the educational realm each month. So pleased to be able to connect with you tonight. We have a very special guest that we will be introducing in just a couple of minutes, but Peter Dewitt is with us this evening. And as you can see, tonight's chat will have a live video stream, and we will be taking questions from the audience. So please submit your questions via our hashtag, that is hashtag IAedChat on Twitter. We will be monitoring this feed, so please do not hesitate to share your thoughts. We will get this live show up on our podcast later on this evening. And if you've not checked us out on iTunes or Podomatic, please do that. Subscribe to us, give us a like, and share your thoughts with us. We would love to be able to connect with you through iTunes or Podomatic on our podcast. So hopefully you can do that. At this time, we are going to introduce ourselves, and I will start. My name is Dan Butler, and I am an elementary school principal at Epworth Elementary School in the Western Dubuque School District, and happy to be here with you this evening. I'm going to turn it over to Andrea.
Hey everybody, I'm Andrea Townsley. I am an instructional coach and curriculum PD leader at Benton Community Schools in Eastern Iowa. Very happy to welcome Peter tonight. I'm going to give just a short little bio, and then we will go ahead and get this discussion underway. Happy Mother's Day to all you mothers out there with us tonight. It's been a great day, so I'm looking forward to this evening. Peter Dewitt is a former K-5 teacher and principal. He runs workshops and provides keynotes nationally and internationally, focusing on collaborative leadership, fostering inclusive school climates, and student engagement. Besides focusing on collaborative leadership, Peter is a visible learning trainer for John Hattie, an instructional coaching trainer for Jim Knight. His Finding Common Ground blog is published by Education Week. He is the 2013 School Administrators Association of New York State's Outstanding Educator of the Year and the 2015 Education Blogger of the Year. Peter is the author of several books, including the best-selling Collaborative Leadership: 6 Influences That Matter Most, and the forthcoming School Climate: Leading with Collective Teacher Efficacy. Welcome to IAedChat Live, Peter. We're so very glad to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me, and happy Mother's Day to everyone.
All right. Well, Peter, again, thanks for being with us tonight. We are so pleased that we were able to make this work. And we're going to start out with a couple softballs for you before we really dig in. But the first one is just tell us a little bit about your background in education and really what's brought you with us here today.
So softballs, is that like a Field of Dreams kind of reference there, Dan?
Hey, you know, it's in our backyard. We're only, let's see, I'm 12 minutes away from the Field of Dreams as we sit right here. So
seriously,
that's true.
Like one of my favorite movies in the world. No, thanks for having me. I was a elementary school teacher for about 11 years. I taught in a couple of city schools, one with a high poverty rate and one with a medium high poverty rate. And then I became a school principal, a K-5 principal for 8 years. So I went directly from teaching elementary school in one city school to being a principal in a K-5 rural suburban school. We were rural based on our location and suburban based on our size. And then about 3.5 years ago, Corwin, which is my publisher, made me an offer I couldn't refuse. They asked me if I wanted to leave my job to work with John Hattie. And, you know, at first it was really just training and doing some visible learning trainings in North America. But honestly, John and Deb Masters, who started visible learning with him, invited me down to New Zealand a few months after that. And then I went to Europe with John, and I've been to Australia a few times, and it's been kind of a whirlwind over the past 3.5 years.
All right, thanks for sharing that. So a little bit about your background beforehand. You spent 11 years in the classroom, 8 years as a K-5 principal, and now you write, speak, and consult on a full-time basis. Talk to us about the transitions that you have been through on these various roles.
There have been a lot, going from teaching in second grade in a city school and then becoming a principal directly in another school district was a very difficult transition. Yeah, well, I shouldn't say difficult, but it definitely had its challenges because I got hired on like April 1st. So I went over once a week at night because the principal I was taking over for became the assistant superintendent. So I went over about once a week to get to meet everybody. So by July 1st, I actually knew everybody in the school district. So that was good. Probably one of the best proactive moves I ever made over that three months. As a school principal, we went through a lot of things in New York State, where I reside. We went through a lot of accountability and mandates and budget cuts and school consolidations. We closed a one classroom per grade level school, and I absorbed the whole population. So I've definitely seen both the bright side and the dark side of school leadership. And honestly, running, facilitating workshops and doing keynotes, I love both, but I probably love running workshops much more because I get to learn from the people that I work with. I'm in Michigan right now. I'm in Port Huron, Michigan, so I'm going to be here for a couple of days presenting, running workshops for Jim Knight on instructional coaching. It's been a huge learning curve for those of you that know about John Hattie's research, that involves, over 1,500 meta-analysis, 195 influences on learning, and about 65,000 studies with 300 million students. So there's a lot of work that's to be done, and quite honestly, I'm doing it all the time because right now I'm actually reading. I was reading a research paper on the plane, so I'm always reading and doing that kind of research where it comes with John's work because so many people know it very well and they ask questions. So lots of different challenges for me, from being a building principal and a school teacher to running workshops and presenting somebody else's work. There are just a lot of questions and things, and you really have to do a lot of work to understand it.
That's awesome. You've mentioned this a little bit, but over the past several years, I know you've done a whole lot of work with John Hattie and with Jim Knight, two of my edu heroes. I mean, they're fantastic. I cannot read enough of their stuff. But talk about your experiences that you've had with these two educators and some of the content that you've explored. You started to get into that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. I'm very, very fortunate. I know that. Jim is somebody who I actually knew before I started working with him because I'd been covering his work on my Education Week blog. But John was the original catalyst for me leaving the principalship. When John invited me down to New Zealand and then to Europe, we spent a lot of time together, and I've been very lucky because he's taken me under his wing. He's been very supportive. In the collaborative leadership book that came out last September, John wrote the foreword. There's just been this sheer depth of getting an understanding of the nuances of his work. I think one of the fatal flaws that school districts will make is they will look at his top 10 influences and say, we're going to choose these top 10. And that's a big mistake because I think you have to understand your current reality before you can ever look at the influences that are going to work best for you. So, that alone, understanding the nuances within those influences are really huge. Because, when you look at something like homework, there are moderators between elementary and secondary. When you look at things like leadership, there are moderators between instructional and transformational. All of the 195 influences have things like that. So it's been a tremendous amount of work that we have to do outside of just, presenting. We don't show up, open the box and say, hey, this is what we're going to present on today, because there are just so many questions that come at us. And we have to understand the context of the people we work with. I also noticed that there's a huge, very often when I was doing Jim Knight's work on instructional coaching, it was a lot of practical applications and how to understand the role of an instructional coach and how to work with leaders and teachers. And those high impact strategies that Jim talks about a lot. But what I noticed is that there's a good relationship between doing Jim's work and talking about high impact strategies and looking at John's work and understanding the influences that go on behind them, along with the effect sizes. So, I've been very lucky with Jim. Jim is another one who has been hugely supportive of the work that I've done, both in collaborative leadership, but just in general. And we've done a lot of talking about the implications for John's work where his work is concerned, and vice versa. Talking to John about the practical strategies that need to be done because he's a researcher at the university level.
Yeah, you're basically like my hero because you've got the research side of Hattie, and then you've got working with Jim Knight, and he's kind of like boots on the ground, getting this stuff going in classrooms and that kind of stuff. And you can see, as I've been to different workshops with both of these folks and with you as well, of how it all comes together. And it's really cool because they're influencing each other, and they're referencing each other's work quite a bit. And I loved what you said about understanding where you currently are within your district, because I think with Hattie's work, it's like we always want to look at that and, hey, there's a top 10. We're going to do these 5. We're going to box it up and we're going to call it good. And then that's school improvement. Well, nothing could be further from the truth, right? It's finding that nuance and what's going to work within your system. What are those little other factors, those little nuanced things within that research? So I'm glad that you brought that up, Peter. Thanks.
No, yeah, you're welcome. I think that the thing about both Jim and John, and I guess where I was coming from with a leadership standpoint lately too, is that I see a gap in what is going on. Like there's a gap. We go after the shiny new toy and say, well, feedback, this is a really great thing, so we're going to go after it. Well, we all know what feedback is, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're using it correctly. And that's some of the interesting stuff about John's research. One of the criticisms of John's research is that he averaged effect sizes of large meta-analysis. And John's been very open and honest about that. I remember being in Denmark with him one time, and we met with 6 of the leading researchers in Denmark, and we sat in a room with them for about 2 hours, and they just fired questions at him, and he answered all of them, and he was very humble, and it was one of my first experiences spending so much time with him. But the thing about it is that he's been very honest about the fact that he averages effect sizes, and that's why it's so crucial that we look for those nuances. And when we look at something like feedback, we can't just say, hey, we're doing feedback. It's really about, is it wrapped around a learning attention success criteria? And what does feedback look like? And it's even going into something like Stone and Heen's work out of Harvard with thanks for the feedback, and understanding the feedback triggers that people feel when they're getting feedback. So it's that, like, it's all of that stuff. It's not just saying feedback has a 0.75, so we're going to do that. There's just a ton of work that goes on around that. And that's why it's important. That's why it scares me sometimes when school districts say, hey, we're going to do the top 10. It's just not a reality.
So speaking of your work, we have a question from one of our audience members. So speaking of the effect sizes, so the question is from Jenna. She says, what do you think is the most significant aspect of Hattie's work? And then also, which elements resonate most for you? So I'll go ahead and say that again. Jenna asks, Peter, what do you think is the most significant aspect of Hattie's work? And then also, which elements resonate most for you?
That's an awesome question. I think the most significant aspect of Hattie's work is honestly how we're talking about it, how we're talking about learning. It's been a catalyst for a lot of really great conversations. So I'd like to say, more influence. Obviously, there were 6 influences in collaborative leadership that mean a lot to me. But, when we're talking about the significance of John's work, it's just the idea that we are finally, I feel like we're in a place where we're focusing on learning, and so many people are having great conversations about it. One of the things that has resonated the most with me is this whole idea of self-efficacy and collective teacher efficacy. It was one of the 6 influences in collaborative leadership. But also, it's just been one of those things that, how we all, you're an instructional coach, Dan's a principal, I was a former principal. I think we all have these things that all of a sudden they become a hot button issue for us that we care a lot about. And the self-efficacy and collective teacher efficacy piece has been something that has completely resonated with me. Jenny Donahue, who is a good friend of mine, she's out of the Ontario ministry. She and I are doing a keynote together at the Visible Learning Conference in San Francisco, and we're going to be talking about collective teacher efficacy. But we're also going to be focusing on this idea of self-efficacy, because that right there is where the rubber meets the road. I think that is where you've got the difference between a person that will say, this is a challenge and I know that I can figure out some strategies to overcome this challenge, or the other side, which is, this is a challenge and I'm going to give up. And it's at the heart of a growth mindset versus fixed mindset. When I was joking around and I held up the research, I'm actually reading some really great research by Shannon Moran, who's out of the university, out of William and Mary, on principal self-efficacy. And I think that those are all pieces that are at the heart of our schools, because a principal with a high level self-efficacy is going to be more likely to collaborate with teachers. They're going to be more likely to look at a school climate that's going to be inclusive and fosters this whole kind of idea of risk-taking more than rule following. But it also helps increase the level of self-efficacy of the teachers that are on staff, which in itself is going to help start to build the idea of collective efficacy, which is going to help kind of look at a problem of practice and give teachers a sense of, where do we need to put our focus to help the school move in the forward direction?
Great, great. Thank you so much for answering those. And if anybody else out there in the audience watching tonight has questions for Peter, please make sure you shoot those to our IAedChat hashtag on Twitter, and we will make sure we will get those asked for you. The next question I have for you is focused on your blog. It says you write a blog called Finding Common Ground with Education Week. Talk to us about some of your topics of interest and popular posts.
Yeah. I feel like, so when I first got hired to write for Education Week, it was back in about July of 2011. And I was very honored, because when I was doing my leadership degree, one of my professors used to have us read Education Week every week. It was part of a critical issues class, so it was kind of cool to get the job writing for them. Honestly, I started off focusing on social emotional learning for students. My doctoral dissertation was on how well school administrators safeguard LGBT students. So I was looking at that sort of idea of minoritized populations and inclusive education and school climate. But it's really kind of blown out to just everything under the umbrella of education, from leadership to, one of my most popular posts, honestly, was John was given a keynote on the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset, and said it had a very low effect size. And that just blew me away, because I'm a huge fan of Peter Dewitt. So I wrote, literally when he was talking, I wrote a blog called Why the Growth Mindset Won't Work. That pretty much went viral. And, I was writing an article for an educational journal in New Zealand, and the editor said, your growth mindset blog's going crazy down here. And then a couple of months later, my editor reached out to me from EdWeek and said, Carol Dweck's writing a response to your blog. So that was kind of a cool experience for me. Not something I ever thought I would do. But there have been a lot of, I don't know if there's ever been one common theme, and that's kind of the crazy part, because you'd think that it would be this recipe and you could go after it all the time, but that's not the case. I mean, one of the first blogs that I wrote that went really well was back in about 2011 on why educators should join Twitter. And that went crazy just because it was sort of new still for those of us who were a little bit reluctant to be on Twitter. And then, I've written about mindsets, and I've written about the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. I've written about, if instructional coaching is so great, why are more principals working with coaches? I've worked on, and Andrea, you might be interested in this, on why instructional coaches are used as compliance officers. Like, those kind of things have all done really well. And it's funny, because the blog became a paid service about 2.5 years ago. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to be done, and nobody's going to want to read it anymore. And honestly, my readership has tripled since then. So and my editor was just up at my house about a week ago too. So there's just been a lot of, I never, even 5 years later, I don't know the rhyme or reason or what's going to connect with people and what won't, but those are some of the popular posts.
Yeah, I remember when you wrote why a growth mindset won't work, and that thing that blew up, and it's still flying around pretty heavily right now. So, and I would agree with you, Peter. Your posts cover so many different avenues of different things that they seem to resonate with me very well, and they're very timely with me with what's happening in my world. So I do appreciate your blog very much. Speaking of writing, you are the founder of the Corwin Connected Educator series, featuring books about all kinds of things, whether it's social media, branding, flipping, leadership, effective learning spaces, and just really a variety of other topics. Tell us a little bit about this. What sparked this idea? And talk a little bit about the success with this project.
What sparked it? 2 glasses of wine and a good conversation with the president of Corwin. Seriously, I was out in California in the summer of 2013 doing some work with Jim Popham. I was out there for the week. First time I was ever out at Corwin, and I was having dinner with a bunch of people. Mike Soule was one of them. He is the president of Corwin Press. And I looked at him and said, you guys are publishing these really long books, and that's just a huge mistake. Like, you need to have shorter form books because guys like me are really busy. And we need some practical stuff that we can put into place tomorrow. And he said, okay, what would you do? And I said, I would look at like technology and education. There's some great people out there on Twitter who are writing stuff. And then across the table was Kristen Anderson, who is the head of professional development. And she said, hey, before you leave, can we talk? And that was literally the week that I was asked to leave my job to work with John Hattie. And at first I said, no, I loved being a school principal. And about a week or two later, they called me and said, Mike Soule really loved your idea about this short form book series. And he was wondering if you would be the editor. And I'm going, I was drinking. I had 2 glasses of wine. It sounded really good at the time. So honestly, I found guys like Tony Saninas and Joe Sanfilippo, who I was huge fans of. And I remember one of the greatest stories was Spike Cook, who's the principal in New Jersey. And I had met Spike about a year earlier, and we were standing at NAESP in Baltimore, and my book on Dignity for All and Safeguarding LGBT Students was close by. And he said, is it kind of cool to have a book in here? And I've always wanted to write a book. So I reached out to him and said, I have this offer for you. What would you like to write about? So there were a lot of those guys, Tom Whitby, Stephen Anderson, they were all writing for the first time. They had never written books. And it was a really great experience for me because it was only supposed to be 6 books on connected education. I wrote one on flipping leadership, but it turned out to be 21 books. And, it was just, it was really awesome because I like being behind the scenes. I don't always need to be in front. And I liked connecting with these people that I valued their work, and they were able to write their first books for the book series. I'm working on one now called the Impact Series for Corwin, short form books once again. But like Michael Folan wrote one of the books, Young Zhao, Andy Hargraves, Russ Qualia, Vivian Robinson, who I'm a huge fan of. She's out of New Zealand. They all have written books for the Impact Series, which has been out over the past few months. And it's a little intimidating to edit a book by Michael Folan because I've known Michael for about 5 years, and to edit a book by him is really kind of a neat experience. So, yeah, I think that whole idea for me was I have I feel like the blog and writing the blog has helped me. I've just always wanted to be very practical. And I think the book series in my mind has always had to be take these people who are some of the best thinkers in the world when it comes to education and get them to write a 50-page book that's going to be super practical for guys like you to read. And that's what has really come out of it over the past couple of years.
They are definitely a great resource to just pick up and read. Like you said, they're very, very short and definitely something you can implement right away. So I definitely appreciate those. The few that I have in the series, definitely something that you guys should pick up. And I'll put a link to some of those on the hashtag so you guys can browse what they have for options for all of those. We do have another question. Terry says, Peter, what advice would you give to aspiring developing teacher leaders on building collaborative leadership skills?
I would, I would really look at this whole idea of self-efficacy, honestly, because I feel like it's the piece, Jim Knight talks a lot about working in partnership and creating better conversations and those kind of relationships. And I feel like in order to do that, you have to understand this whole idea of self-efficacy. So, I've written about it for the Finding Common Ground blog. My friend Jenny Donahue has done a lot of work in collaborative inquiry. So I would look somewhere around there because it's really about, in the collaborative leadership book, I wrote the meet, model, and motivate. And at first I was a little bit worried because I didn't want it to come off gimmicky. But really what I meant was that we often meet people where we think they should be as opposed to where they are. And, if you're going to be a teacher leader and if you're going to try to engage people and bring them in, if you're going to try to enroll people as an instructional coach, stop thinking in your own head about all the information you have and think about listening to where that person actually is so you can engage them. Because we often feel like people are supposed to have the same information we do in our head, but they haven't been a part of the meetings. They haven't done the reading, the research, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really about listening to them and understanding where they are. So as a teacher leader, I would say look at making sure when you're building relationships, you're trying to meet people where they are, and then understand this whole idea of self-efficacy, because self-efficacy is situation specific. So just because you might have a high level of self-efficacy when it comes to being a teacher leader, the people you're trying to work with, the people you might think are resistant, may just not have that high level of self-efficacy, and that's the reason why they're kind of sticking behind.
Awesome. Okay, so we want you guys to keep giving us questions. Those are great questions coming from the audience. So if you have anything you'd like to chat about with Peter, please let us know. Another question I have for you, your most recent book, we've talked a little bit about your collaborative leadership book, 6 Influence That Matter Most. Give us kind of a sneak peek, as far as you'll give us, into the content of this book and what inspired you to write it.
I first started writing a book on instructional leadership, but one of the things that was happening was I was running a lot of workshops for John, and superintendents and principals would say, well, where do we start? Where do we start? Where do we start? And, like I was explaining earlier, there's so many nuances to the work that I sat down and just thought about where are the places that I would start as a school principal. And so those are the 6 influences that matter most as far as I'm concerned. The cool thing about it is you don't have to be a school principal to care about those 6 influences. You can be an instructional coach. By nature of me running workshops for Jim Knight, when I'm presenting on my own work, instructional coaches show up because I write about them for my blog and those kind of things. Teacher leaders show up, those kind of things. So I really just focused on things like, what does instructional leadership look like? What does that mean? Collective teacher efficacy, what does that mean? What does it look like? Feedback, professional development, those kind of places. And I also made sure that what I did was I looked at the standing structures that we have in place and said, let's revitalize them and make them look different. As opposed to creating something new, why don't we look at what we're already doing, understand our current reality, and use the 6 influences in those places.
All right, we have another question from the audience. Jenna says, Peter, how do you feel about being in the spotlight? Is it hard to get teachers to step into their power and embrace their ability to change?
Yes, it is. I'm friends with Tom Guskey, and the one thing about reading all these research papers on self-efficacy and collective teacher efficacy is Guskey's name is all over all of them. And so I often ask Tom a lot of questions. I harass him that way and ask him about this idea of self-efficacy. And it is very difficult to get people to, I wouldn't say, I guess not change, because I feel like we always change. It's how do we improve? And what is it that we're focusing on? But the hard part about getting other people to change is we as leaders have to look at what we've done to work on it leading up to that. Have we made them a part of the collaborative process? Have we made them feel like window dressing as opposed to give them teacher voice? Those kind of things. So, that I would say is probably the difficult piece about change, about getting people to change and improve. To Jenna's question, I think it's really important that once again we go back to the idea of understanding the relationship, creating a relationship, and understanding self-efficacy, and then working on something that the teacher is interested in. Jim Knight says this best. If the teacher is not the one choosing the goal when you're doing instructional coaching, then they're probably going to resist because they just don't see why it's beneficial to them. But if they're the one choosing the goal, then they're going to be more likely and more motivated to go after it. So those are the things you want to think about too.
So, Peter, the next question that we were going to ask was about this collective teacher efficacy. I've heard you talk about this quite a bit in your presentations of late. We're going to skip that because you've talked quite a bit about that here in your other responses. So I'm going to go a little bit off the script for you. So I'm a principal. Andrea is an instructional coach. Talk to me, if you would. How can principals best partner with their instructional coaches to really drive the mission, drive the vision, drive the improvement home within their schools? Is that too broad for you?
No. That's a great question. I think there are a few things. One is provide the instructional coach with support. So, time at a faculty meeting, those kind of things. One of the fatal flaws that I see principals make is that they will say, Dan, you're my principal and I'm the instructional coach and Andrea is the teacher you want me to work with. You'll come up to me and say, Peter, I need you to work with Andrea because she's struggling in some areas, but I go down to work with Andrea and find out that you never had the conversation with her in the first place. Like those kind of things really set an instructional coach up for failure because the principal's not having a conversation with the teacher first. What does instructional coaching look like? There are lots of school districts and the instructional coach really is the compliance officer. They're walking into different classrooms saying, why aren't you pacing at the same time and that kind of stuff. Those are the little things that are going to kill the relationship. So, from a marketing standpoint, I think what you need to be able to do is, one, support the coach by giving them time at the faculty meeting. Have you put out a document like what coaching is and what coaching is not? Have you suggested to teachers to work with the coach and not in a top-down way, but in more of a collaborative way, saying, I was in Andrea's classroom and she's really great at center-based learning, Peter, and I know that that's an area where you really care about and you're struggling. Have you ever thought about talking to Andrea and working with her there? Those kind of, kind of planting the seed in different places are really important. But talking positively about the position, there are lots of places that I go that the principal doesn't show up to the workshop in the first place, and then they really don't know what instructional coaching is about. So have you talked to the coach about what instructional coaching really looks like? And keeping it confidential, not in Jim's mind, the coaching relationship, if Andrea is my coach and I'm the teacher, it's supposed to be confidential between the two of us. You're not supposed to know, as the principal, all of those pieces because that's going to jeopardize the relationship too.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky in that regard, and we very much respect that. And as you know, within Iowa, we've done quite a bit with instructional coaching over the past 4 years with just our teacher leadership and compensation grant statewide that we've done. And I know you've done some work within our state, and you're going to be doing some more work in the future on that. But it's such a high leverage thing. I have a great relationship with my instructional coach, and we kind of call it teeing it up. I try to set him up for work, and he does the same for me with we're using each other to drive the mission home. And I like to use the analogy, I'm trying to get him from hitting 90-mile-an-hour fastballs to him playing kind of fast or slow pitch beer league softball. That's what we want. So anyway, yeah, I think that's all I've got for that one, Peter. Thank you so much. I'll turn it back to Andrea.
All right, we do have another question from the audience. Peter, what can teachers and administrators do if there are no instructional coaches in their schools or in their districts?
That's a fantastic question. I actually have a good answer for that. It's called Make Your Teacher Observation Worthwhile. 2 years ago, I wrote a blog called 3 Reasons Why Your Teacher Observations Are a Waste of Time, and I think many of us have been on the receiving end of bad teacher observations because they just haven't really resulted in any learning. So one of the things that I suggest in both collaborative leadership but also the school climate book that I have coming out in August is to go through sort of it's based on a lot of Jim Knight's work, but go through that cycle with your school administrator. So co-construct a goal together. Have that be the piece that the administrator is looking at when they walk into the room. And yes, maybe you're a Danielson school and you have different pieces that you have to look at, but when you're going to provide feedback, at least provide feedback around that goal that you chose together. And then one of the greatest things that can happen is when a principal sends a teacher a resource and says, Andrea, I understand just from the co-construction of the goal or going into your classroom that authentic engagement is a passion of yours. And I found this really great article on authentic engagement. Send that to the teacher because it positions the principal as the instructional leader, but it also has them working in partnership together. And it's really still working on that cycle where I care as your principal, I care about the goal you chose. I'm going to help you find resources. And then I may not be able to go back into your room formally to see if you've improved on that goal, but I will be going back through when I'm doing a walkthrough and those kind of things. And that's the very thing that I can be looking for. Have a list of what are the goals that each teacher is working on and what are you looking at when you're going into each of those classrooms as sort of a follow-up, and keep learning as part of a cycle, not a one and done.
Great ideas. If there are no coaches in the building, and I like the term instructional leader. Like it's not a manager only anymore. As an administrator, you have to be a leader, especially you're in a situation where you are the one that has to be, the sole person doing that in the building. So great ideas. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for Terry for posing that question for us. We've talked about a broad variety of things tonight. Let's bring it back to something that can be implemented tomorrow. Talk about some of the high leverage, what you feel are the most high leverage skills that we can continue to teach students to ensure they become the best versions of themselves.
So let's look at this from a few different avenues. Number one, as principals, you should be flipping your faculty meetings and making them focus on professional development where you've co-constructed goals with your staff. I did that through my Principals Advisory Council. So make the focus of your school building all about learning. John Hattie has said, especially in the Politics of Distraction, which was a paper he wrote a couple of years ago, that we talk too much about adult issues. We don't focus enough on learning. When it comes to teachers and working on authentic engagement, one of the statements I love the most from Jim Knight's work is, are you authentically engaged or compliantly engaged? So having a discussion with teachers about the difference between authentic engagement and compliant engagement. What we know from research, Janet Clinton, who's out of the University of Melbourne in Australia, is that on average, teachers ask 200 questions per day and students ask 2 questions per student per week. So how are we going to increase student engagement? Maybe we have them talking more in the classroom. That's going to happen when we have learning intentions and success criteria, when they have a checklist where they understand what classroom discussion looks like, or reciprocal teaching. So one of the things that we have to be able to do, and if you can do this tomorrow, is make sure that your students are talking more and you're talking less.
Definitely something that we can do tomorrow and implement tomorrow. I think as adults in classrooms all across everywhere, the adults do too much talking and don't leave enough of the learning and problem solving to the kids. So that's definitely something that we can implement tomorrow. Thank you.
Peter, the next one that we have for you is, if you could change one thing in the landscape of education right now, what would it be? And give us a little context of why you feel this way.
It would be the rhetoric around education. I feel like in the past few decades that we have been the butt of the joke. It has been all about how, we're failing, and, this kind of negative rhetoric about education, not to be political, But because it doesn't matter whether it's Republican or Democrat, the past couple of education commissioners have not been kind to public education when they're talking about it. The rhetoric has not always been positive. So if we could change anything, I would hope that we could change the way we talk about schooling, the way we talk about learning. I think there are lots of us, including the two of you and the people on Twitter and people, that my friends, my former teachers, that are working extremely hard to engage students, and yet it seems like school is supposed to be the unfun thing to do. And I just think that that's portrayed negatively in the media. It is portrayed negatively in commercials. And I feel like we need to talk more positively about student learning and about school in general, because it's just, that is the part that probably out of anything gets to me the most when I hear people talking negatively about school. Too quick of an answer?
No, not at all. I'm trying to keep up on Twitter. So yeah, definitely. That's just, I think in all areas, not just, talking about school in general, is how can we just be more positive? I mean, there's so many things in the world that are so negative. What can we do to just be more positive? So that's great. Great ideas. So Peter, what's next for you? You've kind of got a lot going on now. Give us a snapshot of what's going on. What's next?
Well, actually, one of the reasons why I'm talking with all of you, because Iowa has been very, very kind to me. It started last year when I was asked to speak at the Iowa Administrators Conference in Des Moines, and it was just like packed house all the time. And I'm doing a lot of work with Heartland AEA on visible learning, but now it's transitioning into collaborative leadership. So last week, the State Department of Education for Iowa unanimously approved a collaborative leadership course that I set up. It's about 60 hours. They unanimously approved it to be part of administrator certification. So it's being piloted with Heartland AEA. So I'll be out there in a few weeks. I'll be out there in mid-June to start that off. And the certification work where school administrators are, so I'm going to take that, and I'm actually also going to be doing it at the university level. So there's some universities around the country that are highly interested or we're about to sign contracts, so I'm going to leave their names out of it. We're going to make it part of the administrator certification for aspiring leaders. And then I was the first state to approve it at the state level, but there are some other states that are going to be following suit as well. So that's all very exciting, much more than I would have thought that came out of the 6 Influences of Matter most book, but I've been doing a lot of work around workshops. I've been working with a lot of regionals, districts, buildings around North America. And now the book I just found out the other day too is required reading at the University of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. So there's a lot of that stuff at, when you're looking at the state level, the university level, the regional, district, and building level, where it's being used as administrator certification. So that's where I am next. It sounds easy, but it's a ton of work because there's a lot that goes along with the whole idea of certification and those kind of things. So I'm very, very excited about that.
Well, only good things can come from that. And we look forward to seeing you back in the state of Iowa. We're going to go ahead and close up just a little bit. We're going to give you a little chance to do a little bit of a closing. So be thinking about that while I talk about some of your resources, what you'd like to give us for a closing spiel. So, be thinking about that. If you guys don't know Peter Dewitt and his work, please find him on his website. I did just share that on our Twitter hashtag. His website is www.petermdewitt.com. You can find him on Twitter at Peter M. Dewitt. And you can also look up his blog on Education Week, Finding Common Ground. So if you guys haven't looked him up, he's going to be coming to the state of Iowa here soon and within the next year. And we definitely look forward to working with him, but definitely look him up. He's got some great things to share. So Peter, I'm going to turn it over to you for a final closing thought on IAedChat for us tonight. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I honestly, from an Iowa standpoint, my nephew used to work for the hockey team in Des Moines, and he lived there for a year. And I remember him saying, "Uncle Pete, it's like if I can move back, I want to move to Iowa. I want to move to Des Moines because I really loved being there and stuff." And the first time I went there, I had the same feeling. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited to work with the state education department in Heartland AEA where that's concerned too. But I don't really have much to say. I just, I feel very, very honored to be able to do the work that I do. And I understand that I'm very fortunate to be able to work with the people that I work with now. And although they have big names, I feel like I've been fortunate to work with the teachers that I worked with as school principal too. So it's, when I left the school principalship, they said, you're leaving for greener grass. And I said, nope, I'm just leaving for different grass. So I've been very fortunate in my career to work with so many different people. So thanks for giving me the time tonight.
You bet. We're very happy to have you here. And we're definitely glad you took some time tonight to talk to us. So I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of announcements for upcoming Iowa regional and national events that are coming up. So we've got the BC Ed Camp that's focused on teacher leadership. It's the third Ed Camp that they have done at Benton Community focused on teacher leadership. Will be June 15th, 2017. And if you have questions about that, go ahead and reach out to me and I can give you some more information. We also have the Keystone Premier Educational Conference, the KPEC Conference, June 20th and 21st in Dubuque. If you have questions about that, you can definitely reach out to Dan, and I'm sure he can help you out there as well. And if you guys have any regional or national events or things that you'd like us to share on our monthly EdChat live shows, please let us know, and we will give you a shout out.
All righty, so I'm going to close it up. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your thoughts on Iowa EdChat Live. It is always great learning with all of you. And again, thanks for joining us tonight for this live show. It's a bonus month in the month of May, so we have a live show tonight, and then in 2 weeks, we will be chatting with Dave and Shelly Burgess, our Learn Like a Pirate, Teach Like a Pirate friends, so they'll be jumping on with us then. And, of course, thank you to the rest of our Iowa EdChat team, Colin Wicken and Andrea Townsley, and a very special thank you to Peter for taking some time to chat with us this evening. We really look forward to seeing you more in the future in the great state of Iowa, Peter, so thank you.
Thank you.
Be sure to follow some of the new friends you met here this evening and visit the hashtag IAedChat to continue the conversation. We will be back next week with another great topic, so until next time, be the change. Good night, everyone.